One of the games I am most excited about for this year is Elden Ring. For the last decade, the now legendary game developer From Software has consistently delivered some of the best titles in gaming. Based on what we have seen so far from the trailer and the sparse info we can glean from interviews, Elden Ring is shaping up to be another masterpiece and a much anticipated one at that. This video will cover all the details that we know so far about Elden Ring, and then in the second half of the video, go over From Software as a whole, exploring the themes and gameplay elements that made their titles so successful. A big part of the reason why I want to do this video is to have it as a contrast to my last video, which went over the decline of Blizzard. From Software is on a completely opposite trajectory as they continue their journey upwards. So with that out of the way, let's dive right into the video, starting with what we know so far about Elden Ring. It has been in development for quite some time, with work starting after the release of the DLC for Dark Souls 3. This means work on the game was done in parallel with Sekiro and has been in the works for well over 2 years at this point. The title is expected to release sometime this year. As of the writing of this video, it seems like mid-2020 is most likely. Historically, From Software games have been released in the February-March period, but given that we're already in February with no official release date as of yet, first half of the year is probably the earliest we will see the game. It is interesting to note that some retailers have listed a target date of June 30th, which is the best date we have so far, but is far from being concrete. According to Miyazaki, Elden Ring will have a larger emphasis on traditional RPG elements for character creation, as well as actual player options for combat. Now, it's safe to assume this means much more options for creating your character, so there isn't a set protagonist like in Sekiro. When it comes down to gameplay, expect more options for playstyles and how you want to bring your enemies down. Whether it's through more weapons and or branching skill trees remains to be seen. The developers to my delight have also stated that Elden Ring is their most ambitious project to date. I take this to mean that the world will be much more expansive with more to explore than previous From Software games. The fact that the game will be open world and will introduce new mechanics like horseback riding and mounted combat lends further credence to this. This is probably the most exciting thing for me. Being able to explore a world large enough to require a mount is groundbreaking for From Software, and I sense that the world and environment itself will play a larger role in Elden Ring than previous titles. I do hope exploration and discovery will be expansive in this game. Unlike traditional RPG games, there won't be any standard town locations. Instead, the game will feature more dungeon-like areas instead. I have to imagine that solo NPC characters will still show up in the world as you journey through it, as they have in all From Software games, but don't expect any boxed-in locations loaded with NPCs for you to interact with. Boss fights will remain a feature and focus in the game, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The actual combat in game has been cited as being closer to Dark Souls, except much more evolved. Another notable aspect of the game is the studio's partnership with George R.R. Martin, who is undeniably an amazing writer, and the worlds he creates are rich with lore. Hopefully this helps fans everywhere restore their faith in the fantasy genre as a whole, with a disappointing final season of Game of Thrones and a questionable Witcher TV series. It's high time for the fantasy genre to make a bit of a comeback. George R.R. Martin's role is described as similar to that of a dungeon master, to help set the world and backstory, at which point From Software would build a game on top of it. It sounds almost too good to be true for me, and although we have obviously yet to see what the output is, I'm very excited to see how the lore plays out and unveils itself within the gameplay. Even before this, previous From Software titles have been extremely intricate, with narratives weaving in and out, the player often traveling through memories of the past while navigating the present. I can only wonder how spectacular the world of Elden Ring will be, having someone like George R.R. Martin on board to help push into that next level. Now, details on the actual game itself has been sparse. Due to Corona, the Taipei Game Show was delayed, and it was speculated that further gameplay details for Elden Ring would have been shown at that event. So all we have to date so far is that single Elden Ring trailer, the footage of which has been playing in the background of this video, and a few interviews that have been taking place. The trailer itself is absolutely amazing. The sound, the reverberating music, along with the stunning visuals, still sends chills down my spine each time I rewatch it. That being said, not too much can be gleaned from the video that isn't pure speculation, so I won't even try here, but it's awesome nonetheless, and if you haven't seen it in full yet, put on your best headphones and go watch it right now. It does look like to be set in a high fantasy world, and looks to be medieval themed, with glimpses of warriors clashing in armor, and huge epic landscapes in the background. There are some rumors about the game that pop up from time to time, but I won't get into these too much because 1. They are not confirmed, and anyone can just make these things up. And 2. None of it is even that juicy or detailed enough to really bring up, so it's best just to wait for the official word at this point. This all being said, if there are any key details as of the upload of this video that I might have missed, please share in the comments below. Elden Ring is so anticipated, there are already videos out there with fan-made lores and bosses showing just how fervent the fanbase is. I myself cannot wait for its release, and I know I'll be taking a day or two off of work just so I can play through it. This concludes the first half of the video that focuses on Elden Ring. For the second half of the video, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at From Software as a whole, and the absolutely amazing decade of game development they have had, and why they are poised to continue with their streak. This will also help grant some potential insight on what to expect for their next game. Let's start out by taking a quick look at the roster of titles in the last decade. Starting with Dark Souls 1 in 2011. Often cited as being one of the most influential games of all time, the dark fantasy medieval setting, high difficulty, novel mechanics, and so much more kicked off the decade with a bang. I should asterisk that Demon's Souls is the game that most people point to as the start of From Software's modern run, but this was released before 2010 and didn't receive as much widespread attention as Dark Souls. Moving on, then we had Dark Souls 2 in 2014. I personally love Dark Souls 2. Although of all the games on this list, this one is probably the most controversial, with criticism being lobbed at the game's bosses, environments, and difficulty pacing. While I agree with most of these, I do still think it's an outstanding title, and the DLC does much to make up for some of those issues, with Sur Alon being one of my favorite boss battles of all time. Then we have Bloodborne in 2015. The first deviation from the Souls games, although maintaining a lot of the core mechanics, and innovated on the traditional formula in a completely new Victorian setting, rewarding more aggression from players and a rich detailed story that drew inspiration from Lovecraftian lore. This one received almost universal praise from players and critics alike. I personally found the lore and the story in this game to be absolutely spellbinding. It's a world that features a level of immersion that is hard to come by. Then we have Dark Souls 3, which if I had to sum it up, is a really refined version of the first Dark Souls, featuring epic boss battles, and with the Soul of Cinder being a fitting final boss to close out the Souls games. This title received widespread praise and none of the controversy that Dark Souls 2 had. Finally, we had Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice in 2019, which justifiably won Game of the Year, and features some of the cleanest gameplay I've ever experienced. Taking place in a fantasy feudal Japan, the game features significantly more options for movement, and the parry and resuscitation mechanics were novel, and proved that even after Souls, From Software is more than capable of delivering quality games in different worlds. And of course, next in this series is Elden Ring. Each one of these games I just mentioned deserves their own set of in-depth videos. Indeed, there are many channels solely dedicated to just these titles and never seem to run out of content to cover. It should give you an idea of just how large and intricate these worlds are. Normally, if a studio made even one of these games, it would be a major success and a hit that would fuel them for years to come, once-in-a-decade titles. Yet somehow, From Software has managed to produce 5 of these games, with only Dark Souls 2 being arguably a weaker game. It's an amazing feat, and I can't think of another developer with such an impressive roster of games and ratio of successes. All of these games carry with them some common themes and gameplay elements. The first one that is found in all From Software games is a steep difficulty curve, yet it's still very fair. It's important to have both of these things though. The games are not overly difficult, just for the sake of being difficult. They are set at a certain level where players have to actually think and improve, and in this manner, achieve a sense of relief and accomplishment as they beat certain challenges. Each game has only one difficulty setting. There are no modes for you to choose from. Actually, one could argue that the game only gets harder as you play it more with New Game Plus and other hidden options like the Demon Belt in Sekiro. I think the journalist's call for an easy mode in these games is pretty ridiculous. The games are made to be experienced a certain way, and the difficulty curve is an important part of that. To reduce this curve would remove an integral element of what makes them so rewarding. So, From Software, keep doing what you're doing. For those crying out for an easy mode, you're completely missing the point of these games. Embrace the difficulty, seek to improve, and only then can you understand the beauty that is a From Software game. The second common element is subtle and deep storytelling. Each title has their own backstory, setting, and plot that the player is trying to unravel. It's non-linear, and it's up to each player to discover the world and piece it together for themselves. It's like a puzzle that you have to sort out. There are entire lore channels dedicated to the study of this on YouTube, and I would encourage fans to take a look at these. It adds an entire dimension to these games that are often overlooked. And then there are the iconic boss battles. Almost every boss is unique, and the major ones being major movers in the world of the game itself. These fights are often the centerpiece of the gameplay, and continue to fill players with awe as each game is released. Now as we get to the end of this video, I wanted to reflect on a concept that I think is integral to From Software as a company and carries over even into their gameplay for us players. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Miyamoto Musashi. Today is victory over yourself of yesterday, and tomorrow is your victory over lesser men. If you take a look at the timeline of From Software games, each game innovates on the previous one and creates new gameplay elements that carry over to future games. It's almost as if From Software is making the same game each time. Obviously, the overall theme, the plot, and characters change, but a lot of the core gameplay remains the same, improving over time and evolving with each title. They don't really make different games like other studios, who might have a shooter game, then a card game, and then a MOBA style game. I'm referencing Blizzard here if you haven't already guessed. No, From Software doesn't do that. Each one of their games follows a somewhat similar core foundation. To expert players, each game is distinct enough so it doesn't feel repetitive and requires the learning of new skills. For new players, it's a daunting and shocking experience, dying dozens of times before you can even figure out what's going on. But learning these games is one of the most rewarding experiences that can be found in modern gaming titles. Likewise, players are forced to replay parts and battles until they're good enough to skill their way through it. This concept of trying, failing, improving, and repeat until you succeed is a pattern that continues to play itself out. It's just an interesting point to reflect on, and something I eagerly look forward to in seeing in Elden Ring. So this brings us to the end of the video. If you like this content, be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. It really goes a long way to help us grow the channel. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. I do read a lot of these, so let me know what you think and any kind of content you would like to see in the future. I too am looking to improve. And as always, thank you for watching, and see you all again real soon.